Welcome back. Today is your second set of notes on Unit 4, Agriculture. Today's notes will focus on subsistence agriculture. Our two essential questions are, what are the characteristics of subsistence agriculture, and what are the current agricultural issues? So we are going to start by talking about the different types of subsistence agriculture. And if you remember from our last set of notes, subsistence agriculture is the agriculture or the farming that is used for personal consumption. And this is the farming that typically takes place in less developed countries. So people are farming for survival, not for profit. The first type of subsistence agriculture that we are going to look at is shifting cultivation. Shifting cultivation is also known as slash and burn farming. You will see the term slash and burn farming more often than shifting cultivation. And shifting cultivation or slash and burn farming is really common in tropical areas like the rainforest. So what slash and burn farming is, or what shifting cultivation is where you have an area that is cleared of vegetation, so the trees and the plants and everything are cut down, okay? And then the debris, so everything that's been cut down, is burned. And the purpose of burning that debris is so the nutrients from all of that vegetation, like the plants and the trees, will then soak into the dirt. Okay? After the land has been burned, the land is then farmed for roughly 3 years or less, because that's the amount of time that the nutrients are available before they are depleted. Okay? Then after that, the land is left to grow wild again for 6 to 20 years, and the process is repeated. Okay? The problems with shifting cultivation are that it requires a large land area, because every 3 years or so, this process has to be repeated someplace else. And then that land isn't available to be used again for up to 20 years. Another problem with shifting cultivation is that people that rely on slash and burn farming are losing their land to other industries. It also can lead to deforestation and then low yields, so not a lot of product is produced. Okay, so here's some examples of the clear cutting, or like the cutting down of trees. So then all of this area that has been cut down is then burned and farmed. Okay, so causes of deforestation in the Amazon from 2000 to 2005. 93% of deforestation in the Amazon was due directly to agriculture. Okay, so you have small scale subsistence. This is your slash and burn farming. And then cattle ranching as well. So cutting down trees to make room for grazing land. Question number 1. Which of the following is not one of the problems for shifting cultivation? Your answer is lack of laborers. All the other options are issues or problems associated with shifting cultivation or slash and burn farming. The next type of subsistence agriculture is pastoral nomadism. Right? Pastoral nomadism is similar to cattle ranching in commercial agriculture, but it uses different types of animals. And then the people travel and live with those animals throughout the year. So pastoral nomadism is most common in dry, arid areas, and it's based on the herding of animals. Okay, the type of animal that is used in pastoral nomadism depends on the culture and environment, but it can range from camels, goats, and sheep, which are going to be your most common. And people that practice pastoral nomadism travel with their animals throughout the year. So they're constantly on the move or settling in locations for short periods of time. These people live off the land and they live off the animals. So the animals provide milk and fur and skins that can be used for survival, and then as well as meat when needed. People that practice pastoral nomadism oftentimes get food by trading for animal projects. So they can trade some of their animals when they need to purchase things, or they're able to keep small subsistence farms in wet areas. So when they stop at an area for a couple months, they're able to plant some food and grow some product. The migration of the animals, and with the people that practice pastoral Pastoral nomadism follow a pattern. So each year they're roughly in the same spot at the same time. So like in the spring, if they're in one area, they're going to be there in the next spring. And then nomadic populations are currently shrinking due to technology land competition. So the number of people that are able to practice pastoral nomadism are getting smaller and smaller. So this is a picture of Mongolian yurts. So Mongolians are typically pastoral nomads, meaning they live in these yurts and then they travel with their sheep from place to place. And these yurts are able to be collapsed and then carried and transported very easily. Our next type of subsistence agriculture is intensive subsistence agriculture. Intensive subsistence agriculture is also known as wet rice farming. Okay, so you can see, like sometimes you'll have questions that will say intensive wet rice farming or intensive other. Okay, intensive wet rice agriculture or intensive subsistence agriculture, wet rice farming, takes place in Southeast Asia and East India, and that's the growing of rice. Intensive subsistence other is the growing of other products such as wheat, barley, and other grains, and that occurs in northern China or the interior part of India. Okay, both intensive subsistence wet rice and intensive subsistence other are common in densely populated areas throughout less developed countries. Okay, in these areas, the farm fields are small and little land is wasted, so the farm field like runs right up to the house. And animals and basic tools are commonly used for the labor source. So you can see both of these pictures. So in the top one, you have people picking rice or harvesting rice with their hands or planting rice with their hands. And then in the bottom, this man is using oxen to till his field. Okay, so they don't have the technology or the space to use the big tractors to plant and harvest their food. Instead, everything is done by manual labor. So when you look at wet rice farming is where you have seedlings that are planted into a rice paddy or flooded field, and then that field continues to stay flooded or that area continues to stay wet. And then you have to go through and harvest that rice when it's ready. And wet rice farming is extremely labor intensive because you have to bend over and plant each seedling by hand to make sure they're all spaced adequately. So this map shows your rice production. So China and India are going to be your two leaders of rice production. So this is where you have most of your intensive subsistence wet rice farming. Okay, so here's how, again, you harvest the wet rice. So you pick it. Again, you can see it's very labor intensive. People spend hours bending over and picking the seedlings in the rice out of the paddy. Okay, question number 2. Intensive subsistence agriculture is most common in what type of country? Your answer is going to be LDCs. Okay, our next type of subsistence agriculture is plantation farming. And plantation farming is where you have a large commercial farm that specializes in one or two crops. So you have a large company or a large farm that is owned by a company in a more developed country that specializes in growing a certain crop in a tropical, less developed country. Okay. And all the people that work on this giant farm in the less developed countries are often imported and housed on site. Okay, and all of their labor is done by hand. So the company itself belongs to a more developed country, or a company in a more developed country, but the actual farming practices are done by human labor or migrant workers in less developed countries. And plantation farming is what the majority of American farming was before the Civil War, when slavery was still practiced in the United States. Common crops that are still grown on plantations or with plantation-style farming is cotton, sugar, coffee, rubber, and tobacco. Okay, so when we look at commercial agriculture versus subsistence agriculture, people always wonder whether or not producing too much food is an issue. So the question of overproduction comes up in the discussion of why these commercial farms are producing so much food, and should they really be producing that much food if they don't need it? So farmers in the United States often produce more food than what our market demands. Okay, so they have an overproduction. And to make sure that this food is not wasted, the US government has put policies in place to deal with this surplus production. They have lots of different policies, but the three most common are that farmers will plant a rest crop the following year. So if they produce a surplus of corn one year and then they're able to store that corn and have enough to get them through the next year, then that next year, instead of planting corn, they'll plant clover or hay and then harvest that and sell it for animal feed instead. Another option or way to deal with the surplus production is the government subsidization of crops. So this is where the government will pay farmers to grow something else the following year to make sure there's not a continued overproduction or surplus of a certain crop. And then last, what's more common is when the government actually buys the surplus food from the farmers, and then they either sell it or donate it to less developed countries, or they package it and donate it to food banks across the United States. So this map shows the percentage of farm receiving government payments. So these are farms that receive government subsidies. So the government pays these farmers to grow certain crops. So the government is really dictating what farmers are growing and when they're growing it, so we can manage our overproduction of food. And then this world map shows exporters or importers. So all the purple countries are net exporters, meaning we are sending most of the food that we produce to other countries. And then the yellow or orange countries are net importers, meaning that they are importing the majority of food that their people consume. So the trend is typically your more developed countries are going to be your net exporters, and then your less developed countries are going to be your net importers. Okay, where less developed countries have to import food because they're not able to produce enough food to support their population. Question number 3. In order to deal with the problem of overproduction, governments have enacted which of the following policies? They are selling and donating food to less developed countries. Okay, so government is purchasing overproduction or surplus and then selling and donating that food. So when we talk about agriculture, a lot of times in the news, you hear this phrase sustainable agriculture. And sustainable agriculture is organic farming. They're the same thing. And organic farming or sustainable agriculture currently represents roughly 0.24% of the world's farmland. And what's special or unique about sustainable agriculture or organic farming is it's all natural. Okay, there's limited use of chemicals, meaning there's no spraying of herbicides and pesticides. And instead, crops and animals are left to flourish kind of in their own state or their natural environment. And sustainable agriculture or organic farming is an integrated form of mixed crop and livestock farming. So it's a very true version of mixed crop and livestock farming. And because of this, there's a balanced number of animals and farmland. And you have your animals that are your limited in confinement. So when you go to the grocery store and you see beef that says like free range beef or grass fed beef, they're talking about sustainable agriculture or organic farming. Okay, so animals that were raised without confinements, that aren't given steroids to make them gain weight rapidly or other antibiotics. Okay, so this just shows the difference between traditional agriculture and then organic farming. So traditional agriculture uses herbicides and pesticides to produce excess crops to prevent their crops from getting invaded by invasive species, so some insects and stuff like that. And then with animals, it's giving animals steroid shots and antibiotics to help them grow faster. Versus organic farming is you have no chemicals, everything is all natural, and it's really kind of just living off of the land. So most major companies in the United States have organic branches or sustainable branches within their industry because the desire for organic or more natural-based foods in the United States has been increasing rapidly over the years. So you can see all of the yellow things are like your major food companies, and then the green brands are their like natural or their organic brands. Okay, so this map shows acres of crops treated with chemicals. So this is traditional commercial style agriculture. Right, same thing here with fertilizer. So your normal, typical agriculture. And then this is the land that's used for organic production. Okay, so in order for a farm to be considered organic, it has to be free of chemicals and pesticides for a certain number of years before you can actually start growing food on that land. And that's to make sure that the chemicals are out of the soil. And then it also has to meet certain regulations with what's built on that land, what's near that land, drainage issues, and things like that. But areas that are used for organic farming are very limited. So a lot of times you see the clustered effect of organic farms. Okay, these are the dirty dozen and the clean 15. So the dirty dozen are the 12 produce products that are treated most heavily with herbicides and pesticides. So you should try to buy these organic so you're not consuming a lot of chemicals. Versus the clean 15 are foods that you don't necessarily have to buy organically because their exposure to herbicides and pesticides and other chemicals are very low. Okay. So what challenges do subsistence farmers face in less developed countries? The major challenge for subsistence farmers is producing enough food to feed their people. Okay, they often face pressure to produce more for rapidly growing populations and to promote development through exports. Okay, we know that population grows rapidly in less developed countries because they have high crude birth rates. Okay, when you are having a lot of children and your population is growing rapidly, farmers have to try to keep up with their food production so they're able to support that growing population. Strategies for increasing food supply in less developed countries are expanding the land use. So expanding the land area that's used for farming. The downfall of this is it can lead to deforestation and desertification. So that's wiping out green space and planting fields instead. So it's kind of like wiping out your natural environment. Another strategy is increasing productivity. So Norman Borlaug, he was the guy that came up with different types or different strains of wheat that were more resistant to weather patterns and produced higher yields. Okay, this was called the Green Revolution. So he brought these more effective strains of wheat to less developed countries and were able to plant them and produce higher yields. So creating different strains of plants that have increased productivity. Another strategy is finding new food sources. So looking at utilizing different foods from the ocean or different river-based food options, looking at higher protein grains that have higher calories, so caloric intake can increase, and then improving palatability of foods, so more people are likely to try different things. And then finally, another strategy for increasing your food supply is increasing trade. Okay? And this is bringing in export incentives, so increasing the ability to import and export food as needed. Okay, this map shows undernourished populations. So from 1991 to 2011, okay, areas, your less developed countries, okay, areas in South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, East Asia all saw an increase in undernourishment as their populations continued to grow, while Latin America, Southwest Asia, North Africa, and more developed regions, okay, maintained a low number of undernourished people. Okay, and then this shows the results of the Green Revolution. So when Norman Borlaug brought those different strains of wheat to other countries, how the production increased. So question number 4. Which of the following is a way that LDCs can increase their food supply? Okay, they can find new food sources. So this is looking again around for different food options and utilizing what is available. Okay, what you are going to do is you are going to write your last note summary for this trimester. Okay, your 2 essential questions that you are answering are: what are the characteristics of subsistence agriculture? So what are the different types of subsistence agriculture? And then number 2, what are the current agricultural issues that both subsistence and commercial agriculture face today?